Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. This is Keith Myers. I'm the District Council Chair for the Urban Land Institute in Central Ohio. And to start, I'd like to thank our annual sponsors. Now more than ever, of course, they're critical to us fulfilling the ULI's mission here in Central Ohio. We do live in some interesting times, which of course is an ancient Chinese curse. But from this historic experience of dealing with a worldwide pandemic, there are undoubtedly a few new questions to ask and some new issues to ponder. One interesting conversation is quite likely to be what makes a resilient village, town, or even region in the future. It seems that future dialogues will have to be about more than just climate change. What about resilient healthcare, emergency services, financial systems, and of course, parks? The current crisis has made it clear to all of us that parks play a critical role in the health of a community. In fact, previous pandemics have also played an important role in the shaping of cities and in the creation of parks. Since the Middle Ages, viral diseases were commonly thought to be caused by noxious air of cities. In the Industrial Revolution, that was not an uncommon theory. It was a theory known as miasma. And in fact, one devoted believer of the miasma theory was Frederick Law Olmsted. And after the severe cholera epidemics of 1832 and 1849 in New York City, Olmsted and others began advocating for the development of Central Park, in part to give citizens a place to breathe the healthy air. Today, of course, this pandemic has shown the need for parks for many different reasons. Long walks in the park are now customary for millions as we practice social distancing in the outdoors. One wonders if this is a trend that's going to carry on long past the COVID-19 crisis. To discuss this issue, we're pleased to have Aaron Prosser from Campus Partners and Chris Herman and Andrew Overbeck from MKSK. So without further ado, I'll turn this over to Aaron.
I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. I'm Aaron Prosser, and I'm going to serve as the moderator for this panel. During the presentation, please feel free to ask your questions in the chat section. At the end of the presentation, I'll pose them to our presenters. This afternoon, we will continue the conversation that we began with the webinar ULI held 2 weeks ago with representatives from AECOM. That set the stage for our community dialogue about resiliency in Central Ohio in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. However, parks as essential businesses goes beyond helping our residents manage the impacts of a global pandemic. Building a robust open space system is also key to accommodating growth that is expected in Central Ohio over the coming years. The ULI Columbus District Council has been engaging the community around this issue over the past several years with both Insight 2050 and the Regional Corridor Study. So I'm very excited to introduce Andrew Overbeck and Chris Herman with MKSK to talk about the critical infrastructure of our parks and open space system and its impacts on our health, well-being, economic growth, and social equity.
Great, thank you, Aaron, and thank you, Keith. Really appreciate that introduction. Thank all of you for joining us over your lunchtime to hear this presentation. My name is Chris Herman, and I'm a principal with MKSK. Been here about 20 years now, it's unbelievable. And I'm a city planner by training, and with me I have Andrew Overbeck. Andrew?
Hi, Andrew Overbeck, principal and planner here at MKSK. Honored to be with you here today. Had a lot of experience working with downtowns and districts and neighborhoods, but also park systems. Worked closely with Brad Westall on some projects here for Columbus Recreational Parks Department, and recently completed a comprehensive plan for Great Parks of Hamilton County down in Cincinnati. I also sit on the Central Ohio Greenways Board and have the great fortune to also be part of the Clintonville Area Commission Planning and Development Committee. So today in our discussion, we're going to link together some of these topics and conversations that all of these groups are having, and talk about parks and how we can improve here in Columbus.
That's great. Thanks, Andrew. So just a quick overview of our agenda today. We're going to start talking, we can't help ourselves, we have to talk about the situation we're in, the pandemic right now. And so I'll talk about that, and then we'll talk about how cities and park systems are responding to COVID-19 and our current world. and condition, and then we'll talk about how Columbus can improve specifically related to those ideas and what our future could look like. So with that, let's dive in. So unfortunately, we have these grim statistics. The COVID pandemic is having a crippling impact on our lives and mortality and on our economy and livelihood. But it is also impacting, as we all know, our physical and mental health. This pandemic is putting a sharp relief on the societal issues that already existed. It is shining a spotlight on things like structural inequality. One way we are seeing this is the disproportionate impacts on different groups of our population. We all know from the news that older people are more susceptible, but we are also seeing that African American communities are as well, representing a disproportionate percentage of deaths per infection. This is for a number of reasons. Includes historical, locational inequalities that manifest in population health. That's one of the important determinants. So again, before COVID times, we knew we had neighborhoods of high vulnerability, as mapped here by the Kirwan Institute. We can all see how the greater prosperity of Central Ohio has not been shared and experienced equally throughout Central Ohio. One of the striking statistics is that if you live in one of these neighborhoods, your life expectancy is 6 years less than your fellow Franklin County. That is not acceptable. Mayor Ginther and the city have made these low opportunity neighborhoods a major focus of their efforts. As we all know, our health is determined by a number of factors, including genetics, eating habits, and lifestyle. But our physical environment plays an important role. That includes our built environment, our natural environment, and our work and neighborhood settings. As we all know, our health is determined by a number of factors, including, while people talk qualitatively about health benefits of parks, and we hear that all the time, we're working on parks, is the qualitative data. There is a growing number and volume of quantitative data that highlights the positive physical and mental impacts of people's health in parks. And these have medically proven benefits. So much so that the adage should be, really, take 2 trees, stroll around the park, and call me in the morning. Because access to nature can alleviate some of the most important problems in public health, and that's per the American Public Health Association. And if you want more qualitative and quantitative data, that's a whole separate presentation I'm happy to give sometime. So think about this. This is really interesting to me. Right now, current estimates, 2% of people infected with COVID are dying. But data is showing us that we can prevent a full 10% of premature deaths with more physical exercise. That just reiterates the importance of park systems and getting outdoors. So, there are also economic costs here as well, including an estimated $177 billion in healthcare costs related to information. That means, again, parks are essential to all of us and to our communities. These health benefits span demographics. They accrue regardless of age, and the benefits are in every single age group. So recognizing that parks are beneficial, and perhaps critically so today, are they equitable? And that's a big part of what we want to talk about today. Here are 2 parks in Columbus. The Three Rivers neighborhood has Elk Run Park and Joan Park in Linden. These parks are about the same size, about 5 acres, and Elk Run Park has all sorts of amenities and has been redone and reimagined and reinvested in. And Joan Park is on the list, but right now what you see is what you get there on the right. And the city has been, to their credit, working hard to update and upgrade all the parks. But this takes, as we all know, this takes resources. Already a challenge, is about to become more challenging as park budgets are some of the first to be cut and are rarely whole afterwards. But surely what we have all experienced in these past 9 weeks is that parks are essential. They are an essential business that must be funded. Similarly, it's not just the parks themselves, but where they are located, their proximity, and how one is able to access them from their home. So here are 2 streets that access parks. One is in Clintonville, and the other one is Hudson Street, which is actually right around the corner from Joan Park. One has sidewalks, a tree lawn, street trees, street lights, and on-street parking, all things that help make the pedestrian environment safer and more comfortable. The other has none of this, and you can see the poor soul that's walking along the edge of the roadway there. So environments like the one on the right actually cause physiological stress. So the positive outcomes that we gain by going to parks are negated by this type of environment going to and from them. And in fact, if this is the kind of way we have to get to our parks, we're probably not going to go to the parks in the first place. We also have an increasingly robust trail system. The Olentangy Trail, one of the first trails in Central Ohio, and indeed a prototype around the country, is a fantastic trail. Now we're getting on, what, 40-some, 50 years old now. You can see the kind of environment it has. Again, back to the environment that we experience on these trails. It's lush, it's natural, it's wide enough for some physical distancing and getting by each other. At the same time, it's so popular that we're widening it and adding additional branches, because right now we have bikers and dog walkers and people pushing strollers and here inline skaters. I didn't know it was still a thing, but that's great. Joggers, all competing for the same space. And it's great, but if you look at the downtown connector trail on the right, this is small. We're threading the needle just to make the connection. And again, the connection is more important than not having it, but you can see it's not nearly the same kind of environment. In fact, it probably is also a stressful environment. And I guess one of the things unique to Central Ohio is that our north-south corridors are along our natural riverways, and Andrew's going to talk more about this. Our east-west corridors on the right are the ones we have the most problem trying to connect, and the ones that we really need to think about how we upgrade it and make a more pleasant and pleasing environment. So this is a great recent study released by the Center for Urban and Regional Analysis at OSU. And it looks at, we were concerned about pedestrian and bike fatalities and injuries on our streets and in our community, and that's leading to this Vision Zero effort that's here as well as around the country, and Andrew will touch on that some more. But what's fascinating is with all of us that's staying at home and social distancing, the roads are more open, and the result of that is that we're seeing higher crash rates and higher injury and fatality rates when there are accidents. So you can just see this impact of space on roadways, and it emphasizes our need to think about those safe connections and means of getting pedestrians and bicyclists between where they live and work and great spaces like parks. Another question I think that this experience has raised is, do we have enough big parks? We had actually took these pictures. This next set of pictures we took 2 Saturdays ago. It was the first really nice warm spring day here in Central Ohio. It was great. We had some pictures of small parks, and the people were so close together that we didn't want to incriminate anybody, so we didn't put them in the deck here. But this is Whetstone Park. And while you can see in the top right that the cars are not practicing physical distancing, the people, once they get into park space, have plenty of places to be and enjoy nature without compromising their neighbors or other people. So this shows the importance, highlights the importance of our big parks. And so we need to think about where they are they equitably spaced throughout the community? Do we have enough of them? How do we create more of these spaces? This is the newly completed side of the Greenway, and again, a centerpiece downtown. And this is a picture from that same Saturday 2 weeks ago, and you can see people are enjoying the trail, people have room within the park, and again, emphasizes the importance of our larger park system. Also, Andrew wanted me to make sure I pointed out that we are confident that those 4 people playing with the Frisbee are all related in the same family. So that really brings to the conclusion of this first section, which is, we have changed and adapted, as Keith was mentioning, our physical environments in the past in response to pandemics and outbreaks. Parks like Central Park had their inception in response to such things as cholera and tuberculosis. The question we all need to be considering now, at this point, is what will our response be to our generational crisis? What opportunities does this provide us, and how will we take advantage of those? Because really, green space is a prerequisite for sound collective health. Andrew?
Great, thanks, Chris. Now I want to talk about how cities and park systems are responding to this crisis. I think it's important that we acknowledge that parks and trails are really the only social infrastructure that are open right now, that are usable, that are sort of that third place that people can safely gather. And so we wanted to look at what some of the short-term strategies cities and park systems are employing to continue to allow access to those spaces. But I think what we'd really like to get toward is some creative thinking about, in the long run, how do we react to this? How do we in this era, a light's been shown upon. So we know we've got 1 million trail users on the Olentangy Trail every year, and we want to make sure that they can continue to have access. And thought we'd start here with this excellent mural that's on a part of the Olentangy Trail that goes off street, onto street. And the creative artist that does this owns the property right behind the fence. And they recently added Dr. Fauci to the mural. They're constantly sort of updating it. So he's protecting us, at least on this part of the trail. But we know that we need to do more.
So great.
While I think all of us on this call have probably experienced this, those of us that are able to work at home, we're working more, and we're on Zoom a lot more. We're also doing things like fostering dogs. And adopting dogs. And one of the bike companies, Kent International, that sort of sells entry-level kids' bikes, reported in April a 50% increase in their bike sales. So we might be working more, but we're also needing to get outside and recreate more, and people are behaving in that way. How do we do that responsibly? Open spaces. We've seen different places, whether it's New York City or the beaches in Florida or California. The people are flocking these spaces. Are they behaving properly? And thankfully in Columbus, we can benefit from the fact that we've got some spaces we can get to. We're not all trying to head to the same riverfront or lakefront or beach, and we haven't had to close any spaces down so far. But we know that usership in parks has dramatically increased since the shelter-in-place order took effect in March. In Franklin County, Metro Parks has released their numbers for March. Year on year, 60% increase in visitors to Metro Parks, which is just a staggering figure. It's more than 1 million people in the month of March went to a park as part of the Metro Park system, and that is just with 2.5 weeks or so of social distancing.
And not our best weather.
And not our best weather, exactly. We've seen similar increases down in Hamilton County around Cincinnati, 34% increase in visitors and 83% increase on their trails. So we're seeing that people are flocking to these open spaces. How do we do this effectively and safely? CDC has recognized that it is important right now, during the time of COVID, for people to be able to get outside and get exercise. It's important for our mental health and it's important for our physical health. So there's very simple guidelines that they've prepared that are pretty much the same as it would be if you're going to go to a grocery store as well. Don't go to a park if you're sick. Don't visit crowded parks. Don't use playgrounds. Try to visit parks that are close to your home. I think a lot of people are probably bending that rule a little bit, and stay 6 feet away from each other. And how do we do that? How is that possible? City of Columbus Recreational Parks has issued some guidelines that are additive to what the CDC has put out. They have gone a little bit further, said go to the park with your immediate family and those you're staying at home with. I don't think I've seen that in the last couple of weekends, but I think that's good advice. It is a place that you can gather, and that's great. They have done some things though to make it a little more difficult and make it clear that they don't want you playing basketball. And they want you staying off the play structures. This is a park near my house where they removed the rim. I believe they've done that in a lot of parks across the city, removing the nets on tennis courts and putting signage up around the ball fields as well. Again, so trying to make it clear how people are supposed to behave. My hope is we can get out and be doing these activities again in the near future, but for right now, that's how those spaces need to be used. Down in Cincinnati, the Great Parks system had their Metro Park system has had to go a step farther and rope off and fence off their picnic tables and shelters because people were using them. And in fact, they did, I think, creatively a giveaway of park themed branded blankets, picnic blankets, so that people would get off in the lawn areas and picnic in that way as opposed to using the shelters. So again, having to look at things creatively. Down in Atlanta on the Beltline, which gets a lot of users, they've taken a bit of a different strategy, prioritizing the times of day they would like certain users to use the Beltline. So in the morning hours, prioritizing older adults and those with compromised health conditions so that it's safe for those folks to get out. And then during the mid, sort of those that are out there to exercise. And then after 2 p.m., prioritizing those that are using the Beltline for transit. And I think that's something that we need to think about, is that these systems are not just for recreational enjoyment, they're also for transportation. And they've put out, I think, some pretty fun graphics and signs. Those of you get the police reference there on the bottom right, having a little bit of fun with it. But I think, speaking of having fun with it, Chicago's mayor, I think, got the point across really well in her Instagram post. Your jump shot is always going to be weak. Stay out of the parks. And you know, my son, who's 13, ran across this, and it resonated with him. That it was important to stay out of the parks. He loves playing basketball. He's a little disappointed the rims aren't there anymore, but the message got through to him. And Chicago has put out a sort of a daily map that shows what's open and what's closed. They've had to close down the Lakeshore Trail system and the 606 Trail. You see that red line. But they have a lot of neighborhood parks that are still open. And they've had to approach things a little bit differently because obviously they're a bigger city. But how do we stay 6 feet apart? This is a sort of pedestrian transit advocacy group in Toronto that made this 6-foot diameter or radius around himself as he's walking around. It shows you, even on a wide sidewalk, how hard it is to stay 6 feet apart. You know, you're going to have to probably venture off the sidewalk at certain points and get into the street in order to be the right distance apart. And so I think this image here starts to have us think about how we're allocating space in the public realm. Park systems in Louisville, we're working with the city on a couple things there and worked with them to think through what would it look like to shut down some of their park roads and their Olmsted parks. Again, back to Olmsted and that vision for large open spaces. They've shut down the park roads so that people can have adequate space to enjoy the park and not be on top of each other. And they've put down some markings on the roadway to show, hey, this is what 6 feet looks like, so that, you know, there's not any guesswork involved. And so, again, another method of making sure that the spaces we have continue to be usable. Temporary street closures are being done by a few cities. New York finally is doing this. They started a few miles this past weekend. 100 miles in total is what they're going for. Majority of those miles are streets that are within or adjacent to parks. So again, I think as we think of this, are there opportunities in Columbus to do something like this, taking that adjacency into account? But Oakland, I think, probably was the leader on this. They've been doing this now for a few weeks. And I think eventually trying to get to about 74 miles equitably distributed throughout the city in places that don't have open space, or use these temporary street closures to through traffic to get to certain spaces, get to park spaces. So again, they're slowly adding to this every week, and they're seeing great usership for that. And again, a way for people to be able to safely leave their homes and get the exercise and fresh air that they need. But what about looking at more permanent conversions and reallocation of our spaces? Obviously, Italy, hard hit by COVID, is starting to look at this. The drawing sort of on the upper shows how they are looking at some of their street corridors and opening the travel lanes up for bike and pedestrian usage. The image on the left shows what it looked like on a street that they restriped this past week. And you can see in the curb lane, they've set it up for pedestrians and then an interior lane for bikes. and reallocating that street with lower traffic needs to more pedestrian and bicycle friendly users. I think we're going to see more of this, or we should see more of this in our cities, especially as restaurants reopen. They're going to need to reopen and probably have more outdoor space than sidewalks would allow. And you see a lot of cities are starting to do this and creating that curb lane for outdoor dining so that they can still serve the number of guests they would have inside. So again, how can we think about our open spaces, our public realm more creatively here in the future and allocate it properly? And really start to think of our streets as linear parks and not just conveyances for cars. This is right in front of the convention center, and I'm sure some of you remember what this was like prior to these streetscape improvements on High Street being done. People would cross the street to walk on the other side of the street because it was so uncomfortable to walk along this side of High Street against the convention center. We need to have streets that look more like this, that allow for outdoor dining to spell out, that allow for multiple modes of transportation, and give people space that they need. So my hope is that we can learn some lessons here going ahead and create a public realm that is more conducive to pedestrian activity in the future. So I want to wrap up with how Columbus can improve and what the future could look like, and try to tie some things together, some existing initiatives that the city, MORPC, Central High Greenways, they're all working on, that if we put them together, think about them holistically, I think we can have a great community benefit. One of the things that we look at when we do a Parks and Recreation Master Plan, we looked at this for the city of Columbus, is the Trust for Public Land does a park score. We're sort of middle of the pack of the 100 most populated cities, so we're right at 52. You see the areas in red are those that are not served in a 10-minute walk shed, and the areas in green that are. When we looked at updating the land plan for the City of Columbus Recreational Parks Department last year, we looked at the Trust for Public Land and said, why don't we create our own model, building on that, and geolocate actual access points to parks, actual access points to trailheads, and create a tool that the Recreational Parks Department can use as they evaluate new trail segments and evaluate new park spaces, ensuring that they're equitable, that they take those red areas and make them green areas. So if you look at this, this is the analysis that we did. 64% of Columbus is within that 10-minute walk shed of a trail or a park. About 36% are outside that. So everything you see in red, those are the places where there's inadequate access to parks. And if you put the 1950 boundary on this map, and you see very clearly when as a city we stopped investing in parks and started investing in roads and highways. The 1950 boundary of the city is pretty well served. I think it's interesting to note there is not one city pool outside the 1950 boundary. So as a community, we stopped investing as we should have properly invested in parks and open space, and we've got to now fix that. If you look at these areas in red, a lot of them line up with the areas of greatest vulnerability in our community. This is a CDC measure of the Social Vulnerability Index, and you can see how neatly the low opportunity neighborhoods that Kerwin Institute identified overlap with those areas of social vulnerability. So if you can keep these orange or these pink outlines in your mind as we go through the next several slides, you'll see that these inequities are more than just open space. These are the places where we have the largest sidewalk gaps in our city, the places where we have an inadequate pedestrian infrastructure. So areas in that sort of darker red there are the parts of the city that do not have sidewalks. As in the drawing for Linden, that corresponds fairly directly with pedestrian safety, and accidents that involve pedestrians are in the sort of darker color reds there. Obviously, you see the High Street corridor. You can sort of see that, squint and see the High Street corridor. Obviously, where we have the most pedestrian activity, that's where you're also going to have conflicts. But you can see as you get into that same C shape of the inequity in Columbus, you also see that increase in pedestrian accidents. You also see that with bicycle safety across our city. Same thing, we lack the infrastructure that would make it safe to bike throughout the city. And that's seen in what MORPSE's put together here, and they update periodically a bike comfort app that looks at the roadway level of stress for cyclists. So these darker red corridors are the ones of high stress. And you can see a lot of the corridors going through these parts of our community are the ones that are the most stressful. And we certainly need to address this citywide, but it's particularly impactful when you look at how all of this layers onto our access to parks and open space that are critical parts of our neighborhood health. City is doing some things about this. This is the neighborhood greenways plan, where low stress streets have been singled out in certain neighborhoods to develop a network of easy to bike on streets and corridors that connect up neighborhood destinations with other bike infrastructure. You see in green, those are the bike trails, Allen Creek Trail and the Camp Chase Trail. Again, we're building on these. I think the most complete neighborhood greenway is in Clintonville. I sit on the chair of the Planning and Development Committee in Clintonville, and we put together a plan along with my committee and a couple other bike advocates, a plan for our low stress streets that link up schools, churches, parks, farmers market, library, rec center, the Olentangy Trail. What are the streets that we can safely get around? And again, it's easy. It's signage and it's paint. It's nothing more than that. But it's also making it clear to people where they might feel more comfortable and more safe riding. And it's been extraordinarily popular. My hope is that we can use this to get past some of those east-west connection problems that Chris was mentioning, and make it easier for people to get around, safer to get around their neighborhoods on bike as well as on foot. City of Columbus recently announced a Vision Zero program that's looking to ensure equitable mobility for all and safe mobility for all. Again, you can see where these hotspots are across the city. The goal is to really reduce that to zero, name of the program. But it's going to take a lot of cooperation, a lot of change in the way we think about our roadways and the infrastructure that we're providing. We're going to need to make significant investments in that. So this is something more than just enforcement. It's something that actually improves the infrastructure, the social infrastructure of our city. And likewise, we have the MORPSE corridors, identifying multimodal corridors across the city and ones that will serve all travel modes. You can see the ones they've started with. Northwest Corridor has kicked off. All the other corridors will follow. But again, prioritizing pedestrian, bicycle, transit, and vehicular improvements to go along with denser development that will use our existing infrastructure in an efficient manner. So again, linking all of these things together is critically important to developing a new system of transportation and access in our community. I would like everyone to go to the Neighborhood Design Center's website, columbusndc.org. Available through the weekend is a survey that they're doing, an excellent survey that they're doing about how people are using open space in Central Ohio during COVID-19 and during the shelter-in-place order. I think this will help us gather information about the experiences that people are having. I took it the other day. I found myself answering questions in a way that really did talk about how, you know, we have to step off the curb to avoid people on sidewalks. You know, maybe really think about how it's great that I can access trails from my neighborhood. I can put a kayak in the water in my neighborhood, but not everybody has that ability or access. So please go to columbusndc.org to take that survey. And I believe they will share those results out publicly. So it'll be really fascinating to see the results of that. So I want to wrap up this afternoon with what could the future look like. There's a vision, there's multiple visions for how we could improve Columbus and Central Ohio. And the Central Ohio Greenways Board has published a trail vision that looks at our 233 existing multi-use path miles, shown in purple on this diagram, and envisions 500 additional trail miles. It's a bold strategy, a bold vision for the future, but you can see in orange how we're connecting communities, how we're going across jurisdictions, cross county lines, improving those really important east-west connections so that it is easier to get to certain parts of the city from others, both from a transportation standpoint and improving people's access to outdoor recreation and the great system of parks that we have within Columbus, within the Metro Park system, within other jurisdictions. A real critical vision. You link that up with the land plan that we assisted Recreation and Parks with. And if you recall, the 64.5% within a 10-minute walk shed, the 35.5% outside the walk shed, what would that look like if we made the proper investments in parks and open spaces? We could get, just by looking at spaces that we think we could acquire and trail linkages we think we could make in sort of a 5-year vision, properly funded, properly implemented, we could get close to 80% of the city of Columbus within a 10-minute walk of a trailhead or access point to a park, and start to address some of these inequalities that have impacted our city in the past 50 years. Now is the time to invest in that. Now is the time for us to acknowledge the inequities that have been in place for far too long. And you can start to see in a place like Linden, where we have a lot of red today, how we can change some of that red with additional trail connections and investment in park space to far more green and get close to 90% within a 10-minute walk shed of a park or trail if we implement this vision. If you sort of zoom out and look at Franklin County, one of the things that we wanted to sort of acknowledge is the great role that our metro parks plays in the city of Columbus and the county and the region. You start to connect that up with other jurisdictions' open spaces, and you've got a regional open space network that's pretty fantastic. If you connect it with the Greenways vision that Central Ohio Greenways has, you now have a connected system of open spaces, and you have 5 of our stream and river corridors that give the shape to the city, give the shape to the region, that become part of that. And I think what's sort of the unique opportunity here is that 50% of these stream and river corridors are already in public ownership. We really only need to have one side of these rivers or streams to have an incredible impact on our communities. Imagine if we invested in these spaces and created a system of linear parks along these river and stream corridors. We could really set ourselves apart as a community, and it would have tremendous benefit. And those benefits, as we've talked a lot about today, health and wellness, obviously mobility, environmental benefits, clearly social equity, but also the economic vitality of our region. This is, open space, we like to say here at MKSK, is the anchor of the 21st century. It's the thing that draws people places. In the work that the Knight Foundation has done, they've found that open space is one of the top 3 reasons that people commit to and invest in their communities. And that's what draws people to place. It's incredibly important that we look at this holistically. We can impact our community's access to schools, work, neighborhoods, cultural institutions, activity areas, and we can boost these low opportunity neighborhoods, give them access to the parks and open spaces, jobs, and education that they deserve to have access to. So if you look at this system across the county, the impact it has on linking people with the places that are important in their lives, whether that's schools, work, activity centers, civic locations, but how it can have a dramatic impact in connecting these low opportunity neighborhoods with parks and trails that are so important to our community's health and well-being. And I really think we have the opportunity going ahead that instead of focusing sort of our mental map of Columbus and the Central Ohio region, having that mental map defined by our roads and highways, imagine if we defined it by our trails and our river networks. And that's how we created that mental map of our community. We really think now is an opportunity to think about that. Given what we've learned in the past 8 weeks, I think it's critically important that we commit to moving forward as a community, as parks are the only social infrastructure that's open right now, acknowledging that they are an essential business, that they need to be funded properly and creatively, that they are essential civic, human, public health infrastructure, and that if we don't invest in those, our community in Central Ohio cannot be competitive going forward. So I think we have an incredible opportunity to, as Tom Vanderbilt put it, learn from the coronavirus, understand that the gaps in our livability has been exposed by the coronavirus, and invest in livability going forward, and we will have a more resilient community as a result. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Aaron, and we'll open it up to some Q&A.
Oh, Chris and Andrew, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. This is a critical topic, which is immensely relevant right now, but again, it will continue to be for Columbus as we grow. And I also want to thank Alicia Gaston, the Senior Director of the ULI Columbus District Council, for putting this webinar together and being able to present this information. At the end of the presentation, you're going to get a notice for a survey regarding future topics and formats for continuing this conversation. Please do fill that out so Alicia can plan another great opportunity for us to connect. And in regards to Columbus's growth, Chris and Andrew, the first question I want to ask you comes from Andrew Neal. And he was wondering, as the downtown core area continues to densify, Short North University District, how can we create parks in those areas to alleviate the pressure on existing parks?
Yeah, that's a great question. And in that downtown core and sort of in-town planning area, as we call it in the land plan, that's a critical concern because the ability to acquire space is increasingly difficult given the fact that we're building that out. I think if you looked at the Short North, 5 years ago, the surface parking lots and the one-story buildings that existed 5 years ago don't exist anymore, right? So we know that the development pressure is happening, and it's happening fast. So the ability to acquire ground is going to be difficult. I think there's two opportunities. One is we're probably going to have to think about recreation facilities that are multi-story, and that's going to require some significant investment in buildings. And I think we're going to have to think about our trail systems that run through these areas as linear parks. And right now, I think you could argue very strongly that the Olentangy Trail, as you get north of North Bank Park and you go toward sort of Harrison West and up toward 5th and King, that's the part of the trail that probably feels the most isolated and cut off and less like a park and more like an A to B connection. So I think we have an opportunity to start to think about those trails and the spaces around them more as parks and less as A to B connections. I think those are two places that will require additional investment in the future.
I have two more points. I think as we redevelop in areas, parks need to be a central feature of kind of our larger developments, and we've actually been pretty good at doing that if you think about it. So we think about Columbus Commons, where the City Center Mall was. The park serves a new park, serves as the anchor for development that happens around it. If you think about the Arena District, McPherson Commons serves as an anchor green space and connecting green space for the community around which development occurs. So I think as some of our larger redevelopment happens, and granted that's not everywhere and all the time, but when those opportunities arise, it's important that we embed green space and park space in those developments. And then another piece that I guess I want to emphasize again, we need to think about not just our trails, but our streets as linear parks. And so where we are missing out on green space and park space, I think identifying street corridors where we can reclaim some space and enhance the pedestrian bike conditions and add more things like trees and greenery that really make it more of a linear park, I think are going to be important tools to use in our existing built environment in urban areas.
Great, thank you both. The second question comes from Casey Brandkamp, and she was wondering, she said you presented a very compelling case for great parks, but how does it translate to prioritizing funding, especially in the light of the pandemic?
Great question.
Yeah, I think if any of you were on ULI National's webinar a couple days ago on park spaces in the pandemic park systems, they had, I think, Baltimore, Oakland, and Philadelphia's director of parks and recreation, and they all, to a measure, said, we know we're going to get our funding reduced. I think we've got to think about a way to fund our city parks in a way that doesn't rely on the variations of the general fund. As Chris mentioned, rec and parks is probably the first thing to get cut, and does it ever get restored wholly? Is the big concern. And so I think as you look at the way other park systems are funded, our metro parks in Ohio are funded by levies, and they're able to have more consistent investment as a result of that. And whether Central Ohio voters would tolerate another levy like that, I don't know. But I think, you look at the stability that gives those park systems, it's incredibly important. And then you look at where we've had success in the last, 20 years, 15, 20 years, it's been public-private partnerships. Almost every one of the 5 riverfront parks that's been rebuilt or built has relied on creative funding mechanisms, whether that's the TIF to help fund North Bank Park, the Clean Ohio money and ODNR money that helped fund Side Audubon and involvement with Metro Parks there, or the true public-private partnerships that help fund the greenways and the Side Mile. We're absolutely going to need to think outside the box as it relates to funding these things. And I think we're going to need to require more of the development community to, as we densify as a city, as we continue to grow, toward 2050 and grow by 500,000 plus people, we're going to need all to contribute to the building of the parks and open spaces that we need.
Yeah, and I think at the highest level, just the general population, I don't think thinks of parks as essential businesses. I think that they value them, but when we're having our discussions about what to fund and what's a priority, just like your question, police, fire, jobs, housing, and those all should be up there and main points. But I think discussions like we're having today and getting this kind of information out, parks need to be up there in that list, and they don't need to be just placed secondarily. We need to have that on the table when we're talking about all the other things too.
I think if I could follow up, Aaron, I saw Jeffrey had a sort of follow up to that question about funding, about funding large central parks or lots of smaller parks. I think, as we look at the land plan we did for the city, where are we deficient in open space? I think the goal that we're looking at now in terms of by typology, park typology or size, is we're just looking to increase access to a park, a trailhead, period. But I do think you're correct as you look at, do we have these larger parks actively distributed across the city? We're starting to think about the regional parks that are sort of classified by the Department of Recreational Parks. If you look at the planning zones that we've created, they're generally speaking 2 of those larger parks in every single one of these sort of planning regions. And acquiring additional ground is, I think, an increasingly be difficult. But I think we want to make sure that we have equitable access to parks and open space, period. and make sure that that larger parks are also accessible. I think the thing that will increase with smaller parks is just the fact that those are more difficult to maintain. You've got to drive around to a lot of different smaller parks to maintain them, and that's typically been sort of the reason why Rec and Parks doesn't like to have parks that are smaller than 5 acres. But I think we're going to need to continually be opportunistic when we can only maybe get a couple acres of open space in certain neighborhoods.
So I'm gonna do a cheat answer to this, but just so that everyone knows what the question was, if you had to make a choice, a funding choice, would you, 1, fund a large central park, or 2, lots of smaller parks? And of course, my cheat is option 3, which is all of the above. I think on the public funding side and the public-private partnerships, we need to be thinking about the larger parks. I think the smaller parks are going to start becoming more of things that we should be insisting as part of developments and projects in neighborhoods, and working on smaller local groups that kind of sponsor and maintain those. They might be public-private, they might actually be privately owned spaces, but we ensure that they're open to the public, that they serve as public spaces. So I think it's thinking about how we can make smaller parks happen while we spend larger public funds on the bigger spaces.
One last question for you guys. Certainly funding is a barrier to developing and maintaining a large and robust parks and open space, but what are some other barriers in Central Ohio that would keep us from getting to this kind of larger vision? And what would we do to overcome them?
Can you repeat that one more time? I got distracted by all the great questions.
I was just following up. Certainly funding is a barrier to developing a robust park system. What are some other barriers in Central Ohio to getting to this bigger vision, and what could we do to overcome them?
Yeah, I think as Chris and I have talked about today, the east-west connections are really difficult in our city.
To make good east-west.
To make good, and I think they're difficult, for a lot of transportation reasons that are pretty obvious. But we're down to the hard things. Yep. If we had to go out and raise money today for the Olentangy Trail to link Sidewalks Metro Park with High Banks Metro Park, that would be an easy case to make, right?
It should be.
It should be. I think it would be. What's harder is to do the things that we're doing now, which is the Bethel Olentangy connection that Rec and Parks and Brad Westall just did.
That's great.
These last hard connections. The Goodale ramp is another example of some of those difficult connections. What we need today, I think, more than ever, is a vision for how we tile those things together and why it's important to invest in these more difficult sort of last mile connections to our park and trail and blueway system. Those without a holistic vision for how it works for the whole community. Otherwise, those are seen as one-off projects. So we've got to knit all of those together. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk today about the neighborhood bikeways that the city's doing, the Vision Zero that they're working on, the land plan, the Central Ohio Greenways vision for 500 additional trail miles. This idea of looping in our greenways and our river corridors. I think that vision, that complete story is what we need to get the public and private sectors across jurisdictions together on this to fix some of these systemic problems that we have in our community.
And part of it, often this starts at acquisition of land. There's only so much land in public ownership, and the land we have, we're connecting. So that's great. So I think it's going out and talking to partners and saying, hey, how do we get a trail connection through here? This is a good thing, not a bad thing. And how do we maybe even donate easements or right of way to make trails and connections between park space? And then the infrastructure, the big moves, getting across roadways, highways, in small areas, cost some money, and then making them attractive and lush is another thing on top of that. So I guess starts with these kind of conversations we're having right now, sharing the vision so that people really see this as a roadmap to our future, and then let's figure out how to bite off pieces and continue to interconnect the system. I feel like the more new people get to use these systems and appreciate them and have them close to home, the more everyone embraces this idea.
Okay, well, it looks like we're just about at the 1 o'clock hour, and want to thank everyone for joining us today over your lunch hour to talk about something that's extremely important to not just Columbus, but the Central Ohio region. Please, keep up and stay tuned for messages from Alicia about ULI continuing this conversation. Again, thanks to Alicia and Keith for hosting this conversation, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your Thursday.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.